The deafening crack of splintering wood echoed through Rattlesnake Canyon as the stagecoach teetered on the edge of disaster. Millicent Vaughn clutched the leather seat beneath her, knuckles white, as her world tilted sideways in a terrifying blur of dust and screams. It was supposed to be a routine journey to Linden, Colorado, not her final moments on Earth. The spring of 1876 had beckoned with promise when Millicent left her home in Boston. At 22, she had tired of the suffocating expectations of society and longed for adventure in the expanding Western territories. Her aunt's invitation to help establish a schoolhouse in Linden seemed like the perfect opportunity. Now, as the stagecoach rolled violently down the rocky slope, that dream was crashing around her. "Hold on," the driver shouted just before being thrown from his perch. The other passengers, an elderly couple and a traveling salesman, were tossed about the cabin like rag dolls. The elderly man struck his head against the window frame, his wife screaming his name as blood trickled down his temple. The salesman braced himself against the opposite door, eyes wide with terror. Millicent felt the sickening sensation of weightlessness as the coach launched over a small ledge, then the crushing impact as it slammed back to earth. The door beside her ripped away, and she nearly followed it into the abyss. The stagecoach finally came to rest precariously balanced on a narrow outcropping, 30 feet below the trail and 50 feet above the canyon floor. The silence that followed was deafening. The elderly woman sobbed quietly, cradling her unconscious husband. The salesman lay motionless, his neck bent at an unnatural angle. Millicent realized with horror that he was dead. Outside, there was no sign of the driver or the shotgun messenger who had been riding alongside him. Blood ran down Millicent's forehead, and pain radiated through her left ankle. The coach creaked ominously beneath them, shifting with each movement. "Don't move," the elderly woman whispered hoarsely. "We'll all go over if you do." Millicent froze, her heart pounding. She could see through the broken window that the sun was beginning to set. The thought of spending the night balanced on this precipice was unbearable. Would anyone even know to look for them here? The stagecoach had veered off the main trail when the lead horse had been spooked by a rattlesnake. Hours passed in terrified silence. The elderly man had regained consciousness, but was clearly disoriented. The dead salesman's vacant eyes seemed to accuse Millicent of some unnamed crime. Night fell, bringing with it a bone-chilling cold that seeped through her travel clothes. At dawn, Millicent heard the distant sound of hoofbeats. Hope surged through her exhausted body. "Hello," she called, her voice raw. "Help us, down here." The hoofbeats stopped. Then came the sound of boots on gravel. A shadow appeared at the edge of the trail above. "Anyone alive down there?" A deep voice called. "Yes, 3 of us," Millicent shouted back. "Please, we need help." The man disappeared momentarily, then reappeared with a coiled rope. He secured it to something out of sight and began his descent. Millicent watched as he skillfully navigated the treacherous slope, his movements confident and sure. He was tall and lean, with broad shoulders that tapered to a narrow waist. A worn leather hat shadowed his face as he climbed down, but she caught glimpses of a strong jaw darkened with stubble. When he reached the stagecoach, he peered inside through the broken window. His eyes, the color of a summer storm, met hers. Something electric passed between them, but it was gone in an instant as his gaze assessed the situation with cool professionalism. "I've got you now," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "But we need to move carefully. This whole rig could go at any moment." "There's a man dead," Millicent said, gesturing to the salesman, "and this couple is injured." The stranger nodded. "Madam, I'm Quentin Thornton. I've been tracking this stage since I found your driver and guard back up the trail. They're hurt but alive. Relief flooded through Millicent. I'm Millicent Vaughn. This is Mr. and Mrs. Henderson. Quentin assessed the situation, his expression grim. Mrs. Henderson, I'm going to get you out first, then your husband. Miss Vaughn will be last since she's in the safest position. Mrs. Henderson nodded fearfully as Quentin carefully maneuvered into the coach. It shifted dangerously beneath his weight, and Millicent bit back a scream. With careful movements, he secured Mrs. Henderson with the rope and helped her climb out. After instructing her how to make her way up the slope using the rope as a guide, he returned for Mr. Henderson. The elderly man was barely conscious, but Quentin managed to get him out and up the slope with remarkable efficiency. Finally, he returned for Millicent. "Your turn, Miss Vaughn," he said, extending his hand. "Can you stand?" Millicent tried to put weight on her injured ankle and winced. "I think it's sprained." Quentin's expression softened with concern. "I'll help you, just lean on me." As he helped her to her feet, the stagecoach groaned and shifted again. Millicent gasped as she felt it begin to slide. "We need to move." "Now," Quentin said urgently. He scooped her into his arms and lunged for the open door just as the stagecoach broke free from its precarious perch. It plummeted to the canyon floor below, taking the dead salesman with it. The sound of it crashing against the rocks echoed through the canyon. Millicent clung to Quentin, her face pressed against his chest. She could feel his heart pounding as rapidly as her own. For a moment, they remained frozen, both acutely aware of how close they had come to sharing the stagecoach's fate. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet," he replied. "We still need to get up this slope." He set her down carefully and fashioned a makeshift harness from the rope. "Put your arms around my neck," he instructed. "I'll climb and you just hold on." Millicent did as she was told, trying to ignore the warm, solid feel of him against her body, a most improper position that would have scandalized her Boston acquaintances. But here, suspended over a deadly drop, propriety seemed a distant concern. Quentin climbed methodically, testing each handhold before committing his weight. Millicent could feel the muscles in his back and shoulders working beneath his shirt. Despite the danger, she found herself distracted by the clean, masculine scent of him leather, horses, and something indefinably wild. When they finally reached the top, Mrs. Henderson rushed to help Millicent onto level ground while Quentin pulled himself up. For the first time, Millicent got a clear look at her rescuer in the morning light. He was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps 28 or 30, with weather-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly where it met his collar. His clothes were well worn but clean, a blue cotton shirt, leather vest, and denim trousers tucked into scuffed boots. A gun belt hung low on his hips, the holster tied down against his thigh. "I've got a camp about half a mile back," he said, looking at the sorry group. "I've already brought the driver and guard there. Can you walk with help, Miss Vaughn?" "I believe so," Millicent said, determined not to be a burden. Quentin nodded approvingly, then helped Mr. Henderson to his feet. The older man was more lucid now, but still unsteady. "Mrs. Henderson, if you could help Miss Vaughn, I'll assist your husband." They made slow progress along the trail. Millicent hobbled alongside Mrs. Henderson, gritting her teeth against the pain in her ankle. She couldn't help but notice how Quentin continually scanned their surroundings, alert for any danger. "Are you expecting trouble, Mr. Thornton?" she asked when they paused to rest. His expression turned grim. "Stage robberies have been increasing in these parts. I found signs that your coach might have been deliberately run off the trail." Millicent's blood ran cold. "You mean this wasn't an accident?" "Can't be sure yet," he replied. "But those horses were spooked by something, and I found unusual tracks following your stage's trail before it went off-road." They continued in tense silence until they reached Quentin's camp. It was a simple affair. A small fire, bedrolls, and 2 horses tethered nearby. The driver and guard were propped against saddles, both sporting bandages. They looked up with relief at the sight of survivors. "Thank God," the driver said. "We thought you all were goners for sure." Quentin helped Mr. Henderson sit, then began rummaging through his saddlebags. He produced a bottle of whiskey and a small medical kit. "I need to clean those cuts," he said to Millicent, gesturing to the dried blood on her face. "And we should wrap that ankle." Millicent nodded, suddenly very aware of her disheveled appearance. Her traveling dress was torn and dirty. Her hair had come loose from its pins, and she could only imagine how wild she must look with blood on her face. As Quentin knelt before her with a damp cloth, she felt strangely vulnerable. His touch was gentle as he cleaned the cut on her forehead, his concentration absolute. Those gray eyes, so intense from a distance, revealed flecks of blue up close. "How did you find us?" she asked, trying to distract herself from his proximity. "I was tracking a group of bandits," he explained. "Came across your driver and guard about dusk yesterday. They told me what happened, but they were too injured to go back. I left them with supplies and went looking for the stage." "You're not just a cowboy, are you?" Millicent observed. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Not exactly. I work for the Colorado Marshal's office. I'm what you might call a scout, part tracker, part deputy." He moved to her ankle, carefully removing her boot and stocking with clinical detachment. Still, Millicent felt her cheeks flush at such an intimate action from a stranger. His hands were calloused but deft as he wrapped her ankle with a bandage. "It's swollen but not broken," he pronounced. "You'll need to stay off it for a few days." "That may be difficult," Millicent replied. "I'm expected in Linden. My aunt is waiting for me." Quentin sat back on his heels. "Linden's still a 2-day ride from here under good conditions. With injured passengers and no stagecoach, it'll be longer." He stood and addressed the group. "We need to decide what to do. I've got 2 horses, but they can't carry all of you plus supplies. The stage station is a day's ride back, but going forward to Linden might be quicker." The driver, who introduced himself as Frank Miller, shook his head. "The company will be expecting us at Linden. If we don't show, they'll send someone looking." "How long will that take, Mrs. Henderson asked anxiously. "A day, maybe 2 once we're overdue," Frank answered. Quentin considered this. "I could ride ahead to Linden, bring back help. That would be fastest. And leave us here." Mrs. Henderson's voice rose with alarm. "You'd be safer here with shelter and supplies than trying to travel injured," Quentin reasoned. "I can make Linden by tomorrow afternoon if I ride hard, and be back with help the following day." Millicent looked around at their small group. Mr. Henderson needed proper medical attention, and both the driver and guard were in no condition to travel. She realized that, despite being stranded with strangers, she felt safer with Quentin's capable presence. "I think Mr. Thornton's plan makes the most sense," she said, surprising herself with her decisiveness. "We have water, shelter, and Mr. Thornton can leave us supplies. The risk of further injury trying to travel seems greater than waiting." Quentin's eyes met hers with approval and something else, respect, perhaps. "I'll leave at first light tomorrow," he decided. "That gives everyone a day to rest and me time to hunt some fresh meat for you." As the others discussed details, Millicent found herself watching Quentin. There was something compelling about him beyond his handsome features, a quiet competence, a sense of absolute reliability. In Boston, the men she knew were polished and educated, but she doubted any of them could have scaled a canyon wall to rescue strangers or tracked bandits through wilderness. That evening, after Quentin returned with 2 rabbits that he prepared and cooked for the group, Millicent found herself sitting beside him at the fire. The others had already settled into their bedrolls, exhaustion claiming them early. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for the rescue, but for taking care of everyone." Quentin poked at the fire with a stick, his profile strong in the flickering light. "Just doing my job, Miss Vaughn. Please call me Millicent," she offered. "After hanging from your neck over a canyon, I think formality seems rather unnecessary." A smile tugged at his lips. "Millicent, then, and I'm Quentin to my friends." "Are we friends, Mr. Thornton?" she asked, surprised by her own boldness. He turned to look at her then, those storm-gray eyes serious. "I'd like to think so." Something warm unfurled in Millicent's chest, something that had nothing to do with the fire before them. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the sounds of the wilderness surrounding them. "What brings a Boston lady to Colorado?" he asked, breaking the spell. Millicent smiled. "Is it that obvious I'm from Boston? Your accent gives you away," he said. "That and your clothes are too fine for the local towns." She looked down at her ruined traveling dress and laughed softly. "Not so fine anymore, I'm afraid," she sighed. "My aunt lives in Linden. She's opening a school and asked me to come teach. I was eager for a change." "Running from something?" Quentin asked perceptively. Millicent considered denying it but found herself unwilling to lie to this man. "In a way. Expectations, mostly. My parents had plans for me, a suitable marriage, a proper Boston life. I wanted something different, and a Colorado schoolhouse seemed different enough. It was a start," she admitted, "though I'm beginning to think I got more adventure than I bargained for." Quentin chuckled, a warm, rich sound that Millicent immediately wanted to hear again. "Colorado has a way of exceeding expectations, for better or worse." "And you?" she asked. "Have you always been in Colorado?" He shook his head. "Born in Missouri. Came west after the war. I was too young to fight, but old enough to see what it did to my hometown. Worked cattle drives, then as a scout for the Army. Joined the Marshal Service 5 years ago." "You've lived quite a life already," Millicent observed. "Different from yours," he acknowledged. "But everyone has their own trails to ride." They talked late into the night, long after prudence dictated they should sleep. Millicent found herself fascinated by Quentin's stories of the frontier, and he seemed equally interested in her descriptions of Boston society. There was an ease between them that seemed impossible for such recent acquaintances. When Millicent finally retired to the bedroll, Quentin had prepared for her. She lay awake listening to the night sounds and the occasional shifting of Quentin at his post by the fire. Despite the danger they had faced and the uncertainty ahead, she felt strangely content. There was something about this wild place and the enigmatic man who had rescued her that called to something deep inside her, something that had been sleeping during her proper Boston upbringing. Morning came with the promise of clear skies. Quentin was already awake, checking his horse's tack when Millicent emerged from her bedroll. He glanced up, a brief smile crossing his features before he returned to his task. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Better than I expected," she admitted, combing her fingers through her tangled hair. She longed for a proper bath and clean clothes, but knew such luxuries would have to wait. Quentin finished with his horse and approached her, handing her a small packet wrapped in oilcloth. "Some jerky and biscuits for the day. The driver knows how to shoot if needed, but you shouldn't have trouble. I'll be back with help by tomorrow evening at the latest." Millicent took the packet, her fingers brushing his. "We'll be waiting." He hesitated, as if wanting to say something more, then simply nodded and turned to his horse. Millicent watched as he mounted with easy grace, settling into the saddle like a man born to it. "Be careful," she called as he turned the horse toward Linden. Quentin touched the brim of his hat. "Always am, Miss Vaughn." With that, he urged his horse forward and was soon lost among the trees. The day passed slowly. Millicent helped Mrs. Henderson tend to her husband and the other injured men. They rationed the food and water, knowing Quentin would return but unwilling to take chances. As evening approached, Millicent found herself repeatedly glancing toward the trail, though she knew it was far too soon for his return. "He seems like a good man, that Mr. Thornton," Mrs. Henderson observed as they sat together preparing a meager supper. "Yes, I believe he is," Millicent agreed, trying to sound casual. Mrs. Henderson smiled knowingly. "Not many like him left these days. A true gentleman despite the rough exterior." Millicent felt her cheeks warm but didn't deny the older woman's implication. "We're fortunate he found us when he did." "Indeed," Mrs. Henderson said, "Providence works in mysterious ways." That night, as Millicent lay in her bedroll looking up at the vast canopy of stars, she found herself thinking of Quentin, his quiet strength, his gentle hands binding her wound, the way his eyes seemed to see beyond her carefully constructed facade. It was foolish, she knew, to develop an attachment to a man she had just met and would likely never see again after reaching Linden. Yet something about him had touched her in a way no Boston gentleman ever had. The following day crawled by with agonizing slowness. By mid-afternoon, everyone was watching the trail. When the sound of multiple horses finally reached them near dusk, the relief in the camp was palpable. Quentin rode into view first, followed by 3 men on horseback and a wagon. Millicent couldn't suppress her smile at the sight of him, dusty and tired but whole. Their eyes met across the clearing, and his expression softened momentarily before he turned to introduce the newcomers. "This is Sheriff Patterson from Linden," he said, gesturing to a stout man with a gray mustache. "And Dr. Wilson. The wagon's for those who can't ride." The next hour was a flurry of activity as Dr. Wilson examined the injured, pronouncing Mr. Henderson in need of immediate attention but likely to recover fully. The driver and guard would also recover, but needed rest. Millicent's ankle was healing well, though the doctor advised continued caution. As they prepared to leave, Quentin approached Millicent. "I'll help you onto my horse," he said. "You'll ride with me since your ankle's still tender." Before she could respond, he lifted her effortlessly, settling her sideways on his saddle. The intimacy of the gesture was not lost on either of them, and Millicent was acutely aware of Mrs. Henderson's approving smile. Quentin mounted behind her, his arms encircling her as he took the reins. The proximity was both thrilling and unsettling. Millicent could feel the solid warmth of his chest against her back, his breath stirring her hair when he spoke. "Comfortable?" he asked, his voice low near her ear. "Yes, thank you," she managed, grateful he couldn't see her flushed face. As they rode toward Linden, Quentin told her what he had learned in town. "Your aunt was worried sick when the stage didn't arrive. She's prepared a room for you at her house." "Aunt Beatrice has always been kind," Millicent said. "She raised my mother, you know, after my grandparents died. She never married but dedicated herself to education. I've always admired her independence." "Sounds like it runs in the family," Quentin observed. Millicent smiled. "Perhaps, though I'm not nearly as brave as she is. Leaving Boston was my first real act of rebellion." "Nearly dying in a stagecoach accident seems brave enough to me," he said dryly. She laughed, the sound carried away by the wind. "I didn't have much choice in that, I'm afraid." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the rhythm of the horse's gait lulling Millicent into a relaxed state, despite the impropriety of their position. The landscape around them was breathtaking, towering pines, rocky outcroppings, and glimpses of distant mountains. "It's beautiful here," she said softly, "different from anything I've known." "It grows on you," Quentin replied. First time I saw the Rockies, I knew I'd never be content anywhere else. Is that why you stayed? After the cattle drives and the army, she felt him nod. Partly. And partly because I found purpose here. The frontier needs good lawmen, especially now. Too many see the West as a place to escape the law rather than build a future. Like the bandits you were tracking? Millicent asked. His arms tightened slightly around her. Yes. They've been hitting stagecoaches and payroll shipments between Linden and Denver. They're organized, which makes them dangerous. You think they caused our accident? Quentin was silent for a moment. I'm not certain. The evidence suggests it, but if so, why didn't they rob the stage afterward? It doesn't make sense. The conversation turned to lighter topics as they rode on, but Millicent sensed Quentin's continued vigilance. His eyes constantly scanned the trail ahead and the surrounding forest. Occasionally, his hand would drop to his holstered revolver when a sound caught his attention. They reached Linden as the sun was setting, painting the small town in golden light. It was larger than Millicent had expected, with several streets of wooden buildings, a proper church, and even a hotel. People stopped to stare as their procession entered town, word of the stage accident having spread quickly. Sheriff Patterson led them to a white clapboard building with a sign identifying it as the doctor's office. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson and the stage employees were helped inside, but when Quentin began to lift Millicent down, a voice called out from across the street. Millicent. Oh, thank heaven! A tall, silver-haired woman hurried toward them, her face alight with relief. Aunt Beatrice hadn't changed much since Millicent had last seen her 5 years ago, still straight-backed and keen-eyed despite being well into her 60s. Quentin set Millicent gently on her feet, keeping a supportive hand at her elbow. Aunt Beatrice embraced Millicent tightly, then stepped back to examine her. When I heard about the accident, I feared the worst, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Are you badly hurt? Just a sprained ankle and some cuts, Millicent assured her. I was very fortunate. Mr. Thornton found us and brought help. Aunt Beatrice turned to Quentin, extending her hand with a smile. Then I am forever in your debt, Mr. Thornton. You've saved my only niece. Quentin shook her hand, looking slightly uncomfortable with the gratitude. Just doing what anyone would, madam. Nonsense, Aunt Beatrice declared. You're a hero, young man, and you'll join us for dinner tomorrow night so I can thank you properly. Before Quentin could respond, Sheriff Patterson called to him from the doctor's office doorway. Thornton. Need you over here. With an apologetic nod to the ladies, Quentin excused himself. Millicent watched him go, suddenly aware of the ache in her ankle and the exhaustion permeating her body. Aunt Beatrice linked her arm through Millicent's. Come, dear. My house is just down the street, and I have a hot bath waiting for you. You can tell me all about your adventure once you're clean and rested. As they walked slowly toward a neat house at the end of the main street, Millicent glanced back to see Quentin deep in conversation with the sheriff, his expression serious. He looked up just as she turned, their eyes meeting briefly across the distance before Aunt Beatrice ushered her away. The next few days passed in a blur as Millicent settled into Linden. Aunt Beatrice's house was comfortable and welcoming, with a small room prepared especially for Millicent. The town itself was friendly if somewhat rough around the edges, with most residents eager to meet the new schoolteacher from Boston. True to her word, Aunt Beatrice invited Quentin to dinner the night after their arrival. He appeared at their door looking transformed. His clothes were clean and pressed, his hair neatly combed, and his face freshly shaved. The subtle changes only highlighted his natural good looks, and Millicent found herself unnaturally flustered as she welcomed him. Dinner was pleasant, with Aunt Beatrice drawing out Quentin's story with her natural warmth and genuine interest. Millicent learned that he had been orphaned young and raised by an uncle who taught him tracking and hunting. After working cattle drives and scouting for the army, he had found his calling with the Marshal Service. "And do you enjoy your work, Mr. Thornton?" Aunt Beatrice asked as they sat in the parlor after dinner. "Most days," he admitted. "It's satisfying to bring order to places that need it. Though I won't deny there are times I've considered settling down to something less dangerous." "Such as?" Millicent couldn't help asking. Quentin's eyes met hers. "I've saved enough for a small ranch. Someday I might buy some land, raise horses. But not yet. Because of the bandits." She guessed. He nodded, his expression turning serious. "I can't walk away until they're caught. They've killed 3 men already, and I believe they're planning something bigger." Aunt Beatrice clucked sympathetically. "Such troubles we have out here, but we're making progress. The school is nearly ready to open, and once education takes root, civilization follows." "A worthy goal," Quentin agreed, "though I fear some men are beyond education's reach." When he rose to leave, Millicent walked him to the door despite her aunt's knowing smile. On the porch, they stood for a moment in awkward silence. "Thank you for coming," Millicent finally said. Aunt Beatrice was determined to thank you properly. "It was my pleasure," Quentin replied. He hesitated, then added, "I'll be riding out tomorrow. The marshal wants me to investigate some reports near Castle Rock." Disappointment flashed through Millicent, sharper than she expected. "I see. Will you be gone long?" "A week, perhaps 2, he said, studying her face in the lamplight. "I wanted to make sure you were settled before I left." "That's very kind of you," Millicent said, trying to keep her voice light. "I'm quite recovered, as you can see." Quentin nodded, his expression unreadable. "Miss Vaughn, Millicent, I." He paused, seeming to reconsider his words. "Take care while I'm gone. These bandits are unpredictable, and Linden isn't as safe as it appears." Before she could respond, he took her hand and bowed slightly over it, a gesture that seemed at odds with his frontier persona, but perfectly natural coming from him. His fingers were warm around hers, and Millicent felt a curious reluctance to let go. "Goodbye, Mr. Thornton," she said softly. "Be safe on your journey." With a final nod, he descended the porch steps and disappeared into the night, leaving Millicent with a strange emptiness she couldn't quite name. The days following Quentin's departure dragged surprisingly. Millicent threw herself into preparations for the school's opening, helping Aunt Beatrice arrange the classroom and develop lessons appropriate for the mixture of ages they would be teaching. The work was satisfying but couldn't entirely distract her from thoughts of Quentin and whether he was safe. A week passed, then 2, with no word from him. Millicent told herself it was natural to worry about someone who had saved her life, but the concern felt deeper, more personal than mere gratitude would warrant. She found herself watching the main street from the school windows, hoping for a glimpse of a familiar figure on horseback. The school opened to enthusiastic response from Linden's families. Teaching occupied Millicent's days, and she gradually adjusted to her new life. She enjoyed the children, who ranged from shy 5-year-olds to gangly teenagers. Their eagerness to learn touched her deeply, especially those who had never before had access to formal education. 3 weeks after Quentin's departure, Millicent was walking home from the school when Sheriff Patterson called to her from across the street. "Miss Vaughn, got news you might want to hear." She crossed to meet him, trying not to appear too eager. "Good afternoon, Sheriff. What news?" "Thornton's back," he said. "Rode in about an hour ago, looking like he'd been dragged behind his horse. He's at the doctor's getting patched up." Alarm shot through Millicent. "Is he badly hurt?" The sheriff shook his head. "Doc says he'll live. Took a bullet to the arm and has some nasty cuts, but he's been through worse, apparently. Said he tangled with those bandits he's been tracking." "Thank you for telling me," Millicent said, her mind already racing ahead. "Is he? Are visitors permitted?" Sheriff Patterson smiled knowingly. "Reckon Doc Wilson wouldn't mind if you stopped by. Thornton's staying in the room behind the office while he heals up." Millicent hurried to her aunt's house to leave her teaching materials, then made her way to the doctor's office. She hesitated at the door, suddenly unsure of her welcome. Would Quentin want to see her? Was she being forward by visiting an unmarried man in his sick room? Before she could decide, the door opened and Dr. Wilson emerged, nearly colliding with her. "Miss Vaughn, what brings you here? Not feeling ill, I hope?" "No, doctor, thank you. I heard Mr. Thornton was injured and I wanted to see if he needed anything. He did save my life after all." Dr. Wilson nodded, his expression softening. "Kind of you to check on him. He's resting now, but I'm sure he wouldn't mind a brief visit. Just through there, first door on the right." Heart pounding inexplicably, Millicent made her way through the office to the indicated door. She knocked softly. "Come in," Quentin's voice called, sounding tired but alert. She pushed open the door to find him sitting up in a narrow bed, his left arm bandaged and in a sling. His face was bruised with a cut above one eyebrow, but his eyes brightened visibly when he saw her. "Miss Vaughn," he said, straightening slightly and wincing at the movement. "This is unexpected." Millicent stepped into the room, suddenly self-conscious. "Sheriff Patterson mentioned you were injured. I thought you might need—" "Well, I'm not sure what you might need, but I wanted to offer assistance." A smile tugged at his lips. "That's very kind. I don't need anything at the moment, but the company is welcome." She moved to sit in the chair beside his bed. "The sheriff said you encountered the bandits." Quentin's expression darkened. "Yes, I tracked them to an abandoned mining camp near Castle Rock. There were more of them than I expected, and they were less than hospitable." "You went alone?" Millicent couldn't keep the disapproval from her voice. "I was supposed to be observing, not engaging," he explained ruefully. "That plan changed when they caught me watching them. I managed to escape, but not before they left their mark." He gestured to his injured arm. "Bullet went clean through, fortunately. I'll be back to normal in a few weeks." "And the bandits, still out there," he said grimly. "But I learned something important. They're planning to hit the bank here in Linden. They know the mine payroll will be there next week. It's their biggest target yet." Millicent's eyes widened. "How awful! Has the sheriff been told?" Quentin nodded. "It's why I pushed so hard to get back here despite this." He indicated his injury. "We're preparing a reception they won't expect." "You're not planning to participate while injured, surely?" Millicent asked, alarmed. He smiled at her concern. "Doctor's orders are to rest, but I'll be advising Sheriff Patterson. The marshal is sending additional deputies." Millicent relaxed slightly. "Good, you've done enough already." They fell into comfortable conversation, Quentin asking about the school and Millicent's adjustment to Linden life. She found herself telling him things she hadn't shared with anyone else: her occasional homesickness for Boston comforts, her doubts about her teaching abilities, her growing love for the rugged beauty of Colorado. "It gets under your skin," Quentin said when she described watching a sunrise over the mountains. "This country changes you if you let it." "I believe it already has," Millicent admitted. "I can scarcely imagine returning to Boston society now." "Do you plan to?" "Return, I mean?" Quentin asked, his tone carefully neutral. Millicent considered the question seriously. "I don't think so. There's nothing for me there except memories and expectations I never wanted to fulfill." Something like relief flickered in Quentin's eyes, but before he could respond, Dr. Wilson returned to check on his patient. "You need rest, Mr. Thornton," the doctor announced after examining the bandaged arm. "And Miss Vaughn, while I'm sure your presence is therapeutic, my patient requires sleep to heal." Millicent rose immediately. "Of course, doctor." I should be getting back to Aunt Beatrice anyway." She turned to Quentin, who looked disappointed at the interruption. "I'm glad you're recovering, Mr. Thornton. Perhaps I could visit again tomorrow." His expression brightened. "I'd like that very much." The following days fell into a pattern. Millicent would teach until mid-afternoon, then visit Quentin for an hour before returning to help Aunt Beatrice with dinner preparations. Their conversations ranged widely, from books they had read to places they had seen, from childhood memories to future hopes. With each visit, Millicent felt herself drawing closer to this complex man who seemed equally at home discussing Shakespeare or tracking outlaws. As Quentin recovered, Dr. Wilson allowed him short walks outside. On one such occasion, 5 days after his return, they strolled slowly through Linden's small park, Millicent's hand resting lightly on his uninjured arm. "The payroll arrives tomorrow," Quentin said, his voice low. "Sheriff Patterson has positioned men throughout town, and the bank has been reinforced." "Do you truly believe they'll attack despite the preparations?" Millicent asked. Quentin nodded grimly. "These men are confident and well armed. Their leader, a man called Blackwell, is former military with tactical experience. They won't be easily deterred." "Blackwell," Millicent repeated. "Not James Blackwell." Quentin stopped walking, turning to face her. "You know him?" She shook her head quickly. "Not personally, but the name is familiar. There was a Major Blackwell who served with distinction during the war but was later court-martialed for excessive brutality. It was quite scandalous in Boston circles." Quentin's expression grew troubled. "That matches what we know of him. He's intelligent and ruthless, a dangerous combination." "What will you do tomorrow?" Millicent asked, unable to disguise her concern. "Observe from the sheriff's office," Quentin answered. "Much as I'd prefer to be more actively involved, my shooting arm isn't ready for action yet." Relief mingled with continued worry in Millicent's heart. "Promise me you'll be careful. Don't do anything heroic." Quentin's gaze softened as he looked at her, something unspoken passing between them. "I promise to be cautious," he said carefully, "but I can't stand aside if lives are at risk." Millicent knew it was the best assurance she would get from him. "Then I shall pray for everyone's safety tomorrow." That evening, as Millicent helped Aunt Beatrice prepare dinner, her thoughts remained with Quentin and the coming danger. Her aunt noticed her distraction. "You're worried about tomorrow," she observed, setting down her knife. "And about Mr. Thornton." Millicent looked up, startled by her aunt's perception. "Yes, I suppose I am." Aunt Beatrice smiled gently. "He's a good man, Millie. Different from the Boston gentleman your mother would have chosen for you, but solid and true." "I don't know what you mean," Millicent protested weakly. "Don't you?" her aunt asked. "I've seen how you look at each other. There's something growing between you, something special." Millicent felt her cheeks warm. "Even if there were, he hasn't spoken of it, and his life is so dangerous, always chasing outlaws and risking himself." "Men like Quentin Thornton don't settle easily," Aunt Beatrice acknowledged, "but when they do, they commit fully. I suspect he's considering what kind of future he could offer you." The thought that Quentin might be contemplating a future that included her sent Millicent's heart racing. Was it possible? Did she want it to be? The answer came to her with surprising clarity. Yes, she did want it. Somewhere between the canyon rescue and their quiet conversations in Dr. Wilson's back room, she had fallen in love with Quentin Thornton. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. Sleep eluded Millicent that night. She lay awake thinking of Quentin and the danger tomorrow would bring, of her newfound feelings and the uncertainty of the future. When she finally slept, her dreams were filled with gunfire and shadowy figures. Morning dawned clear and cool. Aunt Beatrice had decided to close the school for the day, given the potential for trouble in town. Millicent tried to occupy herself with household tasks, but anxiety made her clumsy and distracted. Shortly before noon, the sound of horses entering town drew her to the window. A group of miners escorted a wagon toward the bank the payroll had arrived. Millicent watched as the men carefully unloaded heavy boxes and carried them inside under the watchful eyes of Sheriff Patterson and 2 deputies. For the next hour, nothing unusual happened. The town seemed unnaturally quiet, with most residents staying indoors as advised. Millicent was just beginning to hope that the bandits had been deterred by the visible security when the stillness was shattered by gunfire. It began at the far end of town, a distraction. Millicent realized as riders suddenly appeared from multiple directions, converging on the bank. She counted at least 8 men, all heavily armed and wearing bandanas over their faces. Gunfire erupted in earnest as the lawman engaged the bandits. Millicent watched in horror as 2 miners fell in the initial volley. The sheriff and his deputies returned fire from protected positions, dropping one of the attackers from his horse. Then, to her dismay, she saw a familiar figure emerge from the sheriff's office, revolver in his left hand. Despite his injury and his promise, Quentin had joined the fight. "No," she whispered, pressing her hand against the window glass. The battle raged through the main street, bullets splintering wood and shattering windows. Townspeople who had been caught outside scrambled for cover. Millicent lost sight of Quentin in the chaos and found herself praying desperately for his safety. A sudden movement near the house caught her attention. 2 of the bandits had broken away from the main group and were heading toward the residential area, toward Aunt Beatrice's house. With a jolt, Millicent realized they might be looking for hostages or an escape route. She turned from the window, her heart pounding. "Aunt Beatrice, we need to lock the doors." But it was too late. The front door crashed open and 2 men burst in, guns drawn. One was tall and lean with cold blue eyes visible above his bandana. The other was shorter but powerfully built. "Well, what have we here?" the tall one drawled, his eyes fixing on Millicent. There was something calculating in his gaze that chilled her blood. Aunt Beatrice stepped forward protectively. "This is my home and you're not welcome here. Take what you want and leave us be." The tall man laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "What I want, old woman, is a way out of this town. Your house backs up to open country, and you 2 are coming with us as insurance." "James Blackwell," Millicent said suddenly, recognition dawning as she studied his eyes. "That's who you are, isn't it?" The man stiffened, then pulled down his bandana, revealing a handsome face marred by a jagged scar along one cheek. "My reputation precedes me, it seems. And who might you be to recognize a man you've never met?" "Boston society has a long memory for scandal," Millicent replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "The decorated officer who became a butcher and then a thief." Blackwell's expression hardened. "Careful, miss. My patience with Boston's superiority is limited." He turned to his companion. "Tie them up. We'll take the horses in the back," and he never finished the sentence. The back door burst open and Quentin appeared, his revolver aimed steadily despite being in his left hand. "It's over, Blackwell," he said, his voice deadly calm. "Your men are down or surrendered. Drop your weapon." Blackwell's reaction was instantaneous. He grabbed Millicent, yanking her against him as a shield, his gun pressed to her temple. "Back off, Thornton, or I'll kill her." Terror froze Millicent, but through it, she was aware of the absolute focus in Quentin's eyes. He didn't lower his gun, but he didn't fire either. "Let her go," Quentin said, his voice low and dangerous. "This is between you and me." "I don't think so," Blackwell replied. "She's my ticket out of here. Now drop your gun, or I'll put a bullet in her pretty head." Millicent could feel Blackwell's arm around her waist, his breath on her neck. She tried to control her trembling, knowing any sudden movement could be fatal. "If you harm her," Quentin said with chilling certainty, "you won't leave this room alive." Something in his tone must have convinced Blackwell of his sincerity, for his grip on Millicent loosened slightly. In that moment, she acted on instinct, driving her elbow hard into his ribs. Blackwell grunted in pain, his gun shifting away from her head just enough. Quentin fired in the same instant, his bullet striking Blackwell's shoulder. The outlaw stumbled backward, his own gun discharging harmlessly into the ceiling as he fell. The second bandit, seeing his leader down, raised his hands in surrender. Quentin kept his weapon trained on both men as Sheriff Patterson and a deputy rushed in, alerted by the gunshot. "Perfect timing," Quentin said dryly to the sheriff. "These two were just surrendering." As the lawman secured the bandits, Quentin crossed to Millicent, his face tight with concern. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Now that the danger had passed, reaction set in, and she began to tremble uncontrollably. Without hesitation, Quentin pulled her into his arms, his injured one still in its sling but his right arm strong around her. Millicent pressed her face against his chest, breathing in his familiar scent as tears of relief and delayed fear spilled down her cheeks. "It's all right," he murmured against her hair. "You're safe now. It's over." "You promised to be careful," she managed to say, her voice muffled against his shirt. She felt rather than saw his smile. "I was careful. I only used my left hand." Millicent pulled back to look at him, torn between exasperation and overwhelming affection. "That's not what I meant, and you know it." His expression sobered. "I couldn't stay hidden when I saw them heading for your house. I knew what Blackwell was capable of." Something in his tone made Millicent's breath catch. She searched his face, finding in his eyes what she had hoped to see, the same emotion that had been growing in her own heart. "Quentin," she began, but was interrupted by Aunt Beatrice, who had been seeing to the removal of the bandits. "Is everyone all right?" her aunt asked, looking between them with knowing eyes. Quentin reluctantly released Millicent but remained close. "We're fine, madam, though I believe your niece may need some rest after such an ordeal." "Indeed," Aunt Beatrice agreed. "And you as well, Mr. Thornton. That arm needs tending, I suspect." In the aftermath of the attack, Linden slowly returned to normal. The mine payroll had been secured, most of the bandits captured or killed, and the town began rebuilding damaged structures. Millicent returned to teaching, though she found her thoughts frequently straying to Quentin. He had been busy with the aftermath of the raid, giving statements, helping identify the captured men, and reporting to the marshal's office. Their interactions had been limited to brief encounters around town, always in public and always frustratingly interrupted before anything meaningful could be said. A week after the attack, Millicent was tidying the schoolroom at day's end when she heard a knock at the open door. She turned to find Quentin standing there, his arm no longer in a sling though still bandaged. "Mr. Thornton," she said, pleasure warming her voice, "this is a surprise." He stepped into the room, removing his hat. "I hope a welcome one. I've been wanting to speak with you privately, but circumstances have been challenging." "Yes, you've been quite busy," Millicent observed, setting aside the books she had been organizing. "I understand the marshal was pleased with the capture of Blackwell and his gang." "He was," Quentin confirmed. "They'll stand trial in Denver next month." He hesitated, then added, "I've been asked to escort them there and give testimony." Disappointment swept through Millicent. "I see. When do you leave?" "Tomorrow morning," he said, watching her closely. "But that's not why I came to see you." Millicent's pulse quickened at something in his tone. "Oh," Quentin moved closer, his expression serious. "Millicent, when I saw you in Blackwell's grasp, I realized something I should have acknowledged much sooner. Life out here is unpredictable and often short. I don't want to waste any more time not saying what needs to be said." He took her hands in his touch gentle but sure. "I've fallen in love with you. It happened somewhere between pulling you from that stagecoach and watching you build a life here in Linden. You're the bravest, most remarkable woman I've ever known." Joy bloomed in Millicent's heart, so intense it almost hurt. "Quentin, please, let me finish," he said softly. "I know I'm not what your Boston family would have chosen for you. I don't have wealth or social standing. What I have is a dangerous job and an uncertain future. But if you could see your way to sharing that future with me, I swear I would spend every day trying to deserve you." Tears welled in Millicent's eyes as she squeezed his hands. "I fell in love with you too," she admitted. "Not with who my family might have wanted, but with you exactly as you are. Your courage, your kindness, your integrity. I don't want a Boston gentleman. I want a Colorado lawman who climbed down a canyon wall and said, 'I've got you now.'" Quentin's smile transformed his face, erasing the habitual vigilance and revealing the depth of his feelings. He drew her closer, one hand coming up to cup her cheek. "I should warn you," he said, his voice husky. "If you accept me, I intend to leave the Marshal's service after this last assignment. I've put in my notice and made an offer on a ranch 20 miles from here. It's not much yet, but it could be a home." Millicent's heart soared at this evidence that he had been planning a future that could include her. "It sounds perfect." "Is that a yes, then?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." With infinite tenderness, Quentin lowered his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with a passion that left them both breathless when they finally parted. "I'll speak to your aunt before I leave," Quentin said, "to ask her blessing." Millicent smiled. "She'll give it readily. She's been hoping for this outcome since the night you came to dinner." They left the schoolhouse hand in hand, walking through Linden as the afternoon sun bathed the town in golden light. Millicent looked at the place that had become her home in such a short time, and at the man beside her, who had changed her life in ways she could never have imagined when she left Boston. The stagecoach accident that had seemed such a disaster had led her to this moment to love and a future brighter than any she had dreamed possible. As if reading her thoughts, Quentin squeezed her hand gently. "No regrets?" he asked. Millicent smiled up at him, her heart full. "None whatsoever." Quentin left for Denver the following day, promising to return within the month. True to his word, he spoke to Aunt Beatrice before departing, receiving her enthusiastic blessing along with practical advice about ranching in Colorado territory. The weeks of his absence gave Millicent time to consider the dramatic change her life was taking. She wrote to her parents in Boston, explaining her decision to remain permanently in Colorado and her engagement to Quentin. Their reply was predictably disapproving at first, but softened somewhat when she detailed Quentin's heroism and his plans for establishing a horse ranch. 26 days after his departure, not that Millicent was counting, Quentin returned to Linden. He rode straight to the school where Millicent was teaching, appearing in the doorway just as she dismissed the children for the day. The students giggled and whispered as he crossed the room, sweeping her into an embrace that lifted her feet from the floor. Their kiss, while restrained for their young audience, left no doubt of his feelings. "Welcome back," Millicent said when he set her down. Her cheeks flushed with happiness and mild embarrassment. Quentin grinned, looking more carefree than she had ever seen him. "It's good to be home." That evening, over dinner with Aunt Beatrice, he shared news from Denver. Blackwell and his gang had been convicted and sentenced to lengthy prison terms. The marshal had accepted Quentin's resignation, expressing regret but understanding. "And the ranch?" Millicent asked eagerly. "Ours," Quentin confirmed. "The papers are signed. We can move in whenever you're ready." They were married 2 weeks later in Linden's small church, with Aunt Beatrice beaming from the front pew. The entire town turned out for the celebration. Sheriff Patterson serving as Quentin's best man and Mrs. Henderson, fully recovered from the stagecoach accident, standing with Millicent. Their ranch, which they named New Horizon, began modestly a solid cabin, a small stable, and a corral with 6 quality horses that Quentin had selected with expert eye. But it grew quickly as Quentin's reputation for breeding excellent stock spread throughout the territory. Millicent continued to teach in Linden 3 days a week, riding in on a gentle mare Quentin had trained especially for her. The other days she spent learning ranching skills and transforming their cabin into a home. The work was harder than anything she had known in Boston, but infinitely more satisfying. One evening, a year after their wedding, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. Quentin's arm was around Millicent's shoulders, her head resting comfortably against him. "Any regrets about trading Boston society for this?" he asked, a question he still posed occasionally as if to reassure himself. Millicent smiled, taking his free hand and placing it on her slightly rounded belly. "What do you think?" Quentin's expression transformed with wonder as he understood her meaning. "Millicent, are you certain?" She nodded, her eyes shining. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday. We'll welcome a little rancher around Christmas time." Joy and love washed over Quentin's face as he gathered her close. "I never thought I could be this happy," he murmured against her hair. "When I climbed down that canyon wall and found you in that stagecoach, I had no idea I was finding my future. It seems my stagecoach overturning was the best thing that ever happened to me," Millicent said softly. Quentin kissed her tenderly. "To us both." Their son, James Thornton, was born on a snowy December night with Aunt Beatrice and Dr. Wilson in attendance. He had his father's gray eyes and his mother's determined spirit. 2 years later, he was joined by a sister, Elizabeth, whose arrival coincided with the expansion of their ranch house to accommodate their growing family and prosperity. By the time James was 5 and Elizabeth 3, New Horizon Ranch had become one of the most successful in Colorado territory. Quentin's horses were sought after by everyone from the cavalry to wealthy Denver businessmen, and Millicent had established a small school on the ranch for neighboring children too distant from town to attend regularly. On the 5th anniversary of the stagecoach accident that had brought them together, Quentin surprised Millicent with a journey. They left the children with Aunt Beatrice and rode into the mountains, coming at last to Rattlesnake Canyon. Standing on the rim, looking down at the spot where the stagecoach had come to rest that fateful day, Millicent felt a curious mixture of emotions: gratitude for their survival, wonder at the path her life had taken, and overwhelming love for the man beside her. "It looks so different from up here," she observed. "Less frightening." Quentin nodded, his arm secure around her waist. "Most dangers do once you've faced them and moved beyond." They stood in companionable silence, watching an eagle soar over the canyon. Millicent thought of all that had followed from that moment of crisis: love, family, purpose, home. The life she had found in Colorado was richer and more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined in Boston. "Thank you for saving me," she said, turning to face her husband. Quentin smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling with happiness. "I'm the one who should be thanking you. You saved me too, from a lonely life chasing outlaws, never stopping long enough to build something lasting." As they rode home to their children and the ranch they had built together, Millicent reflected that some journeys begin with disaster only to lead to destinations more wonderful than any planned itinerary could provide. Her stagecoach had overturned in the canyon, and a cowboy had climbed down and said, "I've got you now." In that moment of crisis, neither of them could have known those words would echo through a lifetime of love. Years later, when their grandchildren begged for the story of how Grandma and Grandpa met, Quentin would always begin the same way, his eyes twinkling as he looked at Millicent. "Well, you see, her stagecoach overturned in the canyon and I climbed down and said, 'I've got you now.'" And Millicent would smile, knowing that he had kept her safe and loved every day since.